David Edward and Matthew Carauddo discuss Matthew's book, Diamond Dragons.
Matthew, how are you?
Hi, how are you, David?
I'm very good. Hey, Matthew, we were just talking, and I think not only do you do a bunch of like on stage, choreographed fights and stuff, but
I
you
used to,
also
yeah.
you were in France and you actually achieved some level of success in fencing. Is that right?
That's correct.
You would beat me, but but I at least know the
Well,
rules, and I fenced through my second year of college,
oh,
coming up to high
good. No,
school.
that's
Yeah,
good. No,
so
fencing is a one of my best buddies back in the day. He used to use this word obscure, and I was like, "This is a good word for it, Anthony." And we trained together. We flew to France, and we took our examinations in front of these what we would call the French fencing gods. It's also called the
yeah.
FFE or the Fédération Française d'Escrime, and basically, it's just fancy for they have these kind of instructor levels where they want you at a certain level just to show that you have the competency, and there's several different levels. There's what's called moniteur, then there's prévôt, and then there's maître, or some people would think it's monitor, provost, and then master. But either way, the point is to show competency and the understanding of the pedagogy, and also give lessons to students in real time so
Well,
that they
you
can have a look and be like, okay, so he understands these things, but he's completely missing these things. So you can think of it like if you went to a writers conference and you expressed all these details about what you did, and then maybe you're talking to a professional who's done it for 20 years, and they're like, David, you're doing great, but these 4 to 6 things, I'm going to go ahead and say you might want to either or whatever their advice is. So yeah, the fencing was great. I competed for many years. I had my share of golds and silvers and bronzes and blah blah blah. Nothing Olympic, so nobody needs to get like, oh my goodness. But it is a. I also studied martial arts. But so the point is, yeah, fencing is a discipline, but it's obscure, and also it's not like movie fighting, which is something separate and different and equally difficult
yeah, well,
because
yeah.
I've done both.
Right. Now, I enjoyed fencing a lot. I mean, I wasn't probably good enough to go anywhere with it, but and I did a little bit of martial arts, but the just we're going to talk about writing. Obviously, this isn't a fencing video,
Well, that's
but
fine
but the discipline I think is kind of the same thing. It
for
translates,
sure.
right? I mean, and you actually, why don't we? I mean, you've written a book with some of the best imagery that I think I've ever seen.
Really? Well, thank you. I mean, I don't think I've ever been paid that compliment, but I appreciate it. I mean, let's just to connect it too is I agree with you too. Like fencing, martial arts, and almost anything else, it's a discipline where it takes consistency and creativity and ingenuity to get around obstacles and all these kinds of things. And being that I've also been involved in theater and production and all
Mm.
this kind of stuff and acting for 30 years, I can tell you that there's that process, and you probably ran into the same thing. I mean, you write, then you edit, then maybe you're developing, but then there's illustrations, formatting, and then maybe that process kind of repeats a little, and then you're finally like, okay, I want to say I can publish this, and I got to make sure I'm in the right. Did I do all my due diligence? Did I go through my checklist?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, this is a process that we all do with whatever vocation or hobby or work line of work that we're doing. So I liken it to you're going to your own university when you're writing your book.
Well, which is probably true. And fencing, any sport, it's you got to practice, and
Mhm.
you've got to be open to, we'll call it, the criticisms or what or the suggestions from people that know what they're doing, right?
It's funny you mention that too, to kind of again liken it to fencing with it is in fencing, we don't use belts like certain martial arts
Right.
systems. And I'm not saying those are bad or wrong. I'm just trying to say is you're only as good as you've competed. And then if you win a tournament, then your rating, it's basically just called a rating. And of course, it's a little obscure to say this on this podcast or whatnot, but people can look it up and find out, well, what the hell is a rating, for a fencer? What does that mean? But you get more points, and it goes up and it goes down and it does this, and you get an A rank or a B or a C or whatever, and that kind of explains where you're at in the competitive world. And at the same time, every fencer is going to have their strengths and weaknesses, just like every writer would have their strengths and weaknesses. Actors would be the same way. You're not going to cast Danny DeVito to play the Terminator, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But you might cast him opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger in Twins because it's a comedy and it's
Brilliant.
fun.
Brilliant. Well, Matthew, let's get to your book,
Sure.
Diamond Dragons.
Mhm.
It's been out for about a year. Is that right?
Right, and just to set the tone for that, so I did this thing in the book, and this is relevant, so it's fun. Hopefully, readers, watchers will enjoy what I'm about to say. There are some celestial events that occur in Diamond Dragons, not only in book one, but also the rest of the series. But here's the point is there are solstices and equinoxes and there's just all this stuff. They have two moons on their planet, not just one. So anyway, I was like, well, what if I released my books, not just the first one, but on the solstices? And then I thought, what if I do the digital version on the
That's
summer
awesome.
solstice? And if I do the print version on the winter solstice? And some people were like, well, blasphemy, you cannot do that. And I'm like, why not? Like they're like, well, you can't, you're supposed to do it all at once. And I'm like, I don't know if I'll be ready to do that because my book has tons of illustrations. And again, to set the tone,
Yeah.
in the print versions, the print version of Diamond Dragons 1 has 60 plus images or illustrations in it. Diamond Dragons 2 will have around 90 or more.
Wow.
But the digital versions will have considerably less. And that's pretty obvious that I'm so busy formatting it. I may be done with the writing and the editing and the format, but then at a certain point, I'm like, oh man, I still want to do all these little final touches and this. And can I get this illustration? Can we do this? And I figure, why not get the words out for the people who are only going to care about the digital version and they can't even really enjoy the images all that much on their
Yeah, reader. Yeah.
devices, like they're like looking at my my writing on a freaking 6-inch screen. You're like, this is ridiculous. Like, are you crazy? Like, why would you do this to yourself? What are you doing to yourself? But the people they want to do it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's fine, we'll put the digital version out. I don't recommend it because it just abandons all formatting, and I have a lot of formatting in my book, and it's more than what people assume. And
Yeah.
so the print versions, I felt, David, were better to release separate, and it carried that kind of fun thing. Like, people are like, when your book's coming out? I'm like, solstices. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I mean
That's
on the
clever.
solstice.
Yeah, that's good.
I'm
That's
going to
good.
put website timer on there. So it just keeps clicking down. So in case people are ever wondering, I'm like, no, you don't need to be there on the date of it. I don't even care if you buy it on the date of the release. I don't care. But have fun, go look at it, start peeking around, and you might find yourself going down the portal of fire.
Well, look, let's talk. Let's start to put it all together. So this is a series, and
Mhm.
and it has a lot of illustrations.
Right.
What what's the writing process like with those illustrations? I mean, how close do they relate to the story, and how do you organize getting those to an artist while you're still writing and putting the story together, or do you even do it that way? How do you do it? I guess would be the question.
There's a lot of questions, but I totally understand, I think, where you're going. So you're
Yeah,
talking about, well, how do the
so, I think they call
illustration
it compound. Sorry.
it's objection compound.
Exactly.
Um, illustrations, how do they relate to the writing? Because I could totally get that some people will just say, I just want a bunch of illustration in my book. Should I hire an illustrator? I'm like, I don't know, like, what's in your book that you need to have illustrated? Like, I don't know, like, shouldn't I just do anything? I'm like, I it's your book. You can do what you want. But if you asked my opinion, which I'll say now, in case it helps anyone out there, there's an old writer who once coined a term, and actually it was in one of his plays, and it was suit the action to the word and the word to action. He's a little well-known gentleman. Well, maybe not that famous at all. Just depends on how you look at it. But anyway, I always thought of it like, well, if I'm going to put an illustration in my work, I would like it that there's really good reasons for it that go beyond just going, well, here's a picture of the main character. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
If at all possible. Now, sure, sometimes if you introduce a character, this is maybe a good time to show an image of them. Right? You're like, this might be a good time. Like, suddenly this character walks in, and then if you see an image of them, you'd be like, oh, I think I understand why the writer
Right.
decided to do this. As opposed to you're just going by, and then you're like, okay, so that's a turtle. And then you read, and you're like,
Yeah.
right? When
Right.
you see an illustration where you're like, I'm not really sure why that's there, but it's kind of cool. I kind of wanted to not do that. I wanted it where that the illustrations sort of helped reinforce and tell the story. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Isn't that what they do in film? The image is supposed to support the story. Go figure, you know? So that's my process, David. Now, I'm not saying that that means if you don't do it my way, then obviously it's wrong. But I feel that if people heard me say that, they'd say, well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm like, yeah, it does.
Well,
Right?
so do you outline your story and know where all the images and diagrams are going to go? Is that how you want?
I don't
So
want to quote Walter White, but you're goddamn right. You know, like, yeah, I have to. If I
interesting.
don't outline something this significant, and what I'm saying by that is I'm not trying to say, look at me, I'm so awesome. I'm just saying is this wasn't meant to be just a one of, although the first story is essentially a hero's journey that's akin to Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. In fact, it's closer related to Lord of the Rings than probably any of the other, heroes' journeys or whatnot for just a throng of reasons. But the point is, Harry Potter, The Matrix, I guess Alita Battle Angel would count. I'm trying to think of other heroes' journeys, but it doesn't matter. Finding Nemo, like all,
Yeah. Yeah. No,
they
yeah,
all they
they'll
all
have it.
count.
Yeah.
So if the story is told on its own, that's fantastic. But what if you've got all these other things planned? Like you can't see my hand here, but like right way, way out here. Personally, I felt that I'm like, it's nice if you know the end, and that's what the first six lines in my book are. You open the book, and the first thing you see is a poem. It's a six-line poem. I'm not going to do all six lines, but the first two are, "Before I start, I must see my end." Or rather, that's just the first line. And I always felt that was important in the sense that not only for writing, but let me ask you a question, David. When you get in your car, do you know where you're going?
Yeah. For the most part. Yeah.
Usually. And even if someone said, well, Matthew, sometimes I go on joy rides, I'm like, yeah, but would you consider that being like 90% of the time or five or two? And the point being is usually when you get in your vehicle or you get on a train or you get in a taxi cab or you get in a Uber or Lyft, you have a destination in mind. And so I'm just looking at it go, why in the holy mother of Zeus would you even consider writing a book without knowing where your characters are going?
I think
Like
that's right.
where
Yeah.
they're supposed to end up.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, I have a sinking feeling, but I could be wrong about this because there's a lot of people out there that tell me, hey, I do it other ways, and that's fine. But I'd be like, I feel like your characters and your story could wander, go off in a bunch of tangents. Not necessarily bad all the time. Sometimes that's where fun scenes come up and you're like, ooh, this could be really cool. But I also feel that you could get yourself way off in tangents. And I've seen that from these writing groups sometimes. I'll be on a writing group and people say, I started writing and it was great and I wrote 10,000 words and everybody's like, yay. And he's like, yeah, it was yay. And then I got lost. And I'm like,
Yeah.
interesting. Do you know your end? And they're like, excuse me? And I'm like, no, I don't mean when death is coming for you. I was like, I mean, do you know the end of your story? Like, where are your characters going? And then sometimes, David, what do you think their answer is?
Well, clearly sometimes no, right? I mean, which I
And
don't even
I
know what
don't
they're
want
doing
to
then. Yeah.
pull the Mythbusters thing on it and go, well, there's your problem, but it's like, it might be. I'm not saying that it is. It's just saying that if you find that every single time you write, you get lost, you might want to consider knowing the end because it might prevent you from getting lost on the way. I don't know. I feel it sounds really logical, but people will fight me on it constantly. And I'm
I,
like, I'm not there to fight, man. I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight you.
yeah. Yeah. No.
But
See, for me, I mean, I have a different style than you, which is good, which is why we're talking.
yeah,
So
this is a good thing.
I don't outline. However, I do know exactly what you just said. I know the ending, rock solid, and I know where I want the characters to be at the end.
That's
Um,
pretty
it's kind of
important.
it's not an outline like like when you're writing a history book or something, but
No,
it's a
doesn't have to
target.
be.
So it's destination driven, like what you just said.
100%. Well, and let me liken it to something else in case you think that, well, somehow are these things possibly different. In acting, we have to know this as well. And when I say we, I just mean actors, but also like directors. Like, a director, the reason they're a director is because they have a vision and they are going to direct you to the store. In fact,
Yeah.
that's kind of what a director does. Some people always wonder, it's such a fancy, what does a director do? I'm like, when you ask directions to the store, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to say, the easiest way is you're going to take this street all the way down. It's going to be a little weird, but then you're just going to make a left and then another, you're done. And someone else might say, why in the heck you want to do that? It's going to take them 2 minutes out of the way. And they're like, because it's easier. It's like 3 turns. He's like, yeah, but you're going to go this way. And maybe they have 8 turns and it's a little bit more ridiculous, but maybe they're talking about saving time. And you're like, okay, copy that. Now, if someone were to say, well, one director is wrong and the other one is correct, I'd be like, I'm going to say they both get you to the destination. So this is a tough situation, right? You go like, which one is right and which one's wrong? I'm like, they're not wrong. They're different.
They're different, and that's exactly why we're talking here, right? Because I think if someone's searching, so for example, if they find that they get to about 10,000 words and they don't know what they're doing, they abandon it and start another story. Well, maybe if they were a little more destination driven.
And this is akin to if I gave you directions to the store, David, and then when you were going, you followed those directions and didn't end up at the store. You'd be like,
That's right.
What the heck was that Michael dude talking about, man? He said something about going down Main. I did exactly what he said, and I'm at Target. I'm not at freaking Starbucks. Well, obviously the directions were jank, so you don't want that.
Yeah.
So the way I look at it is, if you get to the destination, who cares how you did it? Unless it cost one guy $50 million and the other guy spent $5 million, you'd be like, well, I want to say you guys both did it, but one of you was slightly more efficient with their money and you're fired, like Mr. $50 million, dollar guy.
Yeah.
But anyway, right, David, I believe it's difficult to pin down the process of storytelling and creation other than the extremely skeletal basics that must be present, like character arcs, like using the tools to your advantage, foreshadowing, forewords, and forwards, the ones at the beginning of the book, red herrings, irony, right?
Yeah.
All these things, they're important to have in your stories. It doesn't mean you have to use them all. It doesn't mean you have to use them all at these particular times. Like I've seen that. Some people will say, well, if you don't create the inciting incident before 5 minutes into the film, then it's obviously wrong. And I'm like, really? What if it's like 5 minutes and 5 seconds? Like, do you just shoot them? Like, what's wrong with you about these timers and stuff? Like, I get it if you're like, okay, your inciting incident didn't happen until an hour into your 70 chapters into your book. Okay, now we're being ridiculous. But this idea of just you have to do everything at a certain moment is just ludicrous. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and when those molds come and go too, right? I mean, the one mold will get worn out, and then the industry shifts to another one and another one and stuff.
It's a really good point. Yeah, things come in and out of style, and every storyteller is different. Like, I mean, here's another one I'll just bring up that it just popped to mind because I was talking to another author about this, and I don't remember when or who it was, but it was about, I want to say her name's Margaret Mitchell, who wrote Gone with the Wind. Is that correct, David? Do you know?
Yeah, quizzing me on, I don't know.
She wrote Gone with the Wind. Obviously, Gone with the Wind is
I'm aware of it.
it's pretty fantastic. This is an excellent thing. Actually, one of the characters in my book has an arc that's very similar to Scarlett O'Hara's.
Okay.
I'm not going to ruin this story for anybody. However, then, it was so successful. Everybody's like, are you going to write Gone with the Wind too? And, she probably tossed around. I don't know the details, but she did write it. And it was kind of a disaster. Like it didn't hit well. It didn't work well. And I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. I think it's like one of those things that if you went, wow, Gone with the Wind, it's amazing. And then, Gone with the Wind sequel, whatever she called it, it was overall panned. Yeah. And someone might say, well, how does that work if she's such a good writer? I'm like, you ever seen Stephen King maybe bomb a few books? Like it's happened. Like,
yeah.
Does that mean he sucks? I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
And even the ones that bomb probably sold, right?
There's that too. But either way, depends on how people want to look at it. Even if Stephen King wasn't famous, let's say, he's still an excellent writer. There's no way you could come up and say he's a terrible writer or he's a inefficient writer.
Yeah, just the opposite. He's very.
This is all I'm saying. So I get it that everybody might say, well, I don't like that style. I'm like, that's fine. Not everybody likes Batman movies. They'd prefer, I don't know, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I don't know, but some people will also appreciate all of it. I happen to be the kind of person that, because I've been involved in theater and performance and film and acting and directing for all these years, I don't look at it like, oh, well, I don't like tennis, so I'm not going to see any movies about tennis. I'll be like, if the writing is excellent, I'm happy to do it. Breaking Bad was a great example. At first, I didn't have time. I was busy. People are like, Breaking Bad, Breaking Bad. And I'm like, what is that? I don't know. And they're like, it's about meth. I'm like, oh, that's great. That sounds perfect. Like completely in line with my things. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what? I don't want to see this. But then I heard there was Vince Gilligan, and I was like, excuse me. I'm like, so wait a second, Vince Gilligan. What is he doing? And then I kind of read the log lines, and I was
Yeah.
like, what is this?
Yeah.
Chemistry teacher, cancer, stuck in the desert, wearing his underwear, doing this, holding the gun, and you're like,
Look, that's a
I
good
gotta see
example.
this.
I came to it late. I ignored it the whole time, and then
That's what I mean.
I watched it on Netflix, and I was like, "Oh my lord, this is like really good."
It's great
Yeah,
writing. So the
yeah,
point is too, is even if you don't like an anti-hero, which of course he is, he's essentially begins as Darth Vader, or I mean, excuse me, he begins as Anakin Skywalker briefly, and then immediately changes into Vader, pretty much. And
yeah,
then we just watch that the whole time, and somehow we're like, wow, I'm really rooting for him.
yeah,
Why?
yeah. No, that's a good story. That which is you get to a point where you realize you're rooting, and but you don't know why anymore, and it's like, wow, what a journey, you
Well,
know?
we all
Yeah,
know. I mean, I hope we know why, right, David? Because they've connected you to him
yeah,
and they make you feel strongly for this person. It makes perfect sense. If they had started it where he was just a chemistry teacher and he just got involved in meth because why not? I am pretty certain that people would have watched it because it was great writing, but they would have been like, man, I want to see him get murdered. Like, he's got to
yeah,
go down. Instead, everybody's like, oh, cancer, and oh, his son and his wife, and he's got to support his family, and we've got this. And he really loves Jesse Pinkman, and you're like, so I loved how they did this. Not to mention, obviously, Bryan Cranston was an excellent actor to bring
oh,
in
very much so. Yeah, good.
because he's so charismatic and also truthful. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen any frames of Bryan Cranston in other work,
Sure.
but I've never seen him do almost anything that didn't seem just raw. Like he was literally just being like, "There's no skin or anything. You can see right in my soul. Like anytime you want, as long as the
Didn't
camera's on, I'm showing you my soul." And I'm like, "You got some guts, son."
he was a dentist on Seinfeld? Very dramatic.
Oh yeah, exactly.
It was hilarious. All right, so Matt, let's get into real quick. When you sit down to write, what do you do? Do you write on a word count? Do you write for an amount of time? How do you get a book done?
Good question. Okay, so I am new to this, so I don't want to sit there and say, well, this is my process for this, but I likened it to every single other project I ever did because I had to like write my own stage performances. Usually they were staged combat, so there was very little dialogue. Um, I mean, there still was though, and there was so much action and things, and you have to write staging, and so I'm familiar with this process. Also, as an actor, I was always familiar with, you have to not only memorize your lines, which by the way is the least of your problems as an actor, but it's really digging into the soul of the work and everything. Not only understanding, well, what did the playwright or whatever the screenwriter want to get out of this, but also what's the overarching messages. There's a lot you need to do as an actor that have very little to do with memorizing lines. So anyway, there's this, again, we talked about this at the beginning of our conversation, this process. So I was like, I got to check off all these boxes. You know what I mean? So for me, at the very start of any of these things, just like I said earlier, I have to know the end. Before I start, I must see my end. So I needed to know, well, what the bloody heck happens, like the crucial end scene kind of thing. And I can walk it through my mind. Usually I'll have written some notes. Um, all over the place, and I'll put them all in a folder or something like that on my desktop. Obviously, Diamond Dragons 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, whatever. Then I might start thinking about, okay, I want to know the beginning too. But if I have some ideas where I'm like, oh, there needs to be a scene when these two characters meet, they gotta meet. Think of it like David, remember that scene in Heat, right? When Al Pacino's character and Bobby De Niro's in Heat, it's basically villain and cop. They meet in a cafe because he pulls him
Yep,
over on just like speeding, right?
yep.
And they're just sitting there staring at each other, and you're like, "This is going to be great." We get to that's like having a conversation between two, a arch villain and a hero, just Superman and the Joker talking, and we
Yeah,
we see that. So it's like when you find that moment in your head, I feel like this is a good time to just write the idea down. You don't have to write the scene. You could write the
Interesting.
idea. And then
Interesting.
from there, you might get other ideas. Okay, well, oh, great. Oh, that's right. This character has to croak. Like he's got to die, but I'm not sure how I want him to die. Should he do it like X or, right? So I might put that in a box. So I also liken it to puzzle pieces, David, right? When you get a new puzzle, if you're a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, or maybe you're a big kid and people use puzzles, sometimes I'll do it with my daughter, Caitlin. Shout outs to her. She's actually in the book.
Oh,
Some of her
nice.
artwork, yeah, at
Oh,
the back.
nice, 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 nice,
Yeah, I'm
nice.
gonna do that on all the books. Anyway, the point is, right, you dump out all the pieces. Now, in a puzzle, you're lucky because you got all 250 or whatever the hell it is. In writing, you don't have them until you take them out of your brain and throw them down on the page.
Right,
You
right.
and I know that that's true. So then eventually you're going to find, well, these are a lot of fucking pieces. You know what I mean? You're like, I don't know what to do with all this. So I tend to move them beg, mid, end, and that's it. And
Okay.
sometimes, as you probably imagine, you go like, I wanted this to happen midway. I'm gonna move it way to the front. We got to
Yeah,
get that done,
and
son.
it's got to make sense and all that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And eventually, David, for me, then that's how it is. I arrange the pieces, and then from there, if I'm nice and lucky, I've been able to simultaneously been sort of outlining in that kind of not staccato rhythm thing, but that kind of like, okay, I know obviously they're gonna win,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, you don't want the good guys all just lose, and then that's it in the end. You gotta know your end, but usually people understand that the good guys are gonna win somehow, but how? That's the biggest question.
Right.
So you put that into place. Then I maybe got the beginning, the middle, and stuff, and I just sort of kind of, boom. Then it's all about writing the scenes. Now, I'll say this too, and cut me off if I'm going too long, is that I've heard some people will say you should think of a scene and then write it like 6 or 8 or 12 different versions.
Mm.
I never really minded that. It's just like I thought of it as possibly inefficient. I do something like that, but it stays in my mind. I'll think of maybe 6 iterations of how this scene can occur, and then I'll be like, oh, ooh, no, don't do that. I'm gonna run into this roadblock. Ew, no, don't do that. And then that will go away, and I'll kind of let that fade back. But I might keep pieces. I
Right.
might be like, dude, it'd be really cool if they met while they were discussing this one particular artifact that had just been discovered, or something like that, because it likens to but I might have had that in a improper setting, where I'd be like, oh, I have them doing it in this scene. That doesn't make sense because everybody's going to be walking all over the place. I can't do that. They got to be alone. Do you see where I'm getting at?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I won't write any scenes, if possible, that I'm just, going to axe later, because I've seen that all too often. I'll hear writers that tell me, oh, I wrote it, 120,000 words. I'm like, great, fantastic. He's like, no, like, oh my God, dude, I cut like almost all of it. And I'm like,
Yeah. No. Yeah. No.
what the hell? Like,
No. Yeah.
why? Like, what happened? And they're like, oh, because editors, because this, that, and the other. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm not trying to be weird about it, but I'm like, I get if you're writing it, you have 120K on the docket, and then you come out with 110, or maybe you'll have a little more. It depends on if you had to develop.
Yeah.
But the point is, holy cow, if you're cutting, I don't want to say 90% of your work, but I'm like, that's pretty inefficient. You're wasting your time. That'd be like driving a
Yeah.
car all over the place.
Yeah. You're wasting time, gas, energy, all that stuff. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just like I don't want to quote John Turturro from what was it, Oh Brother Art now, but that don't make no sense.
Well, Matthew, it's been great talking to you. What advice might you? We've talked about how you write and stuff, but what advice might you have for someone who thinks they have a book in? I mean, they've got it up here, they haven't quite figured out how to get it out here yet. What like maybe a first step, or just what if you had a chance to talk to them, what would you tell them?
I do. And I would just want to say thanks again for having me too. Like I haven't been invited to any of these things yet, and it's probably because I'm sort of like a hobbit Jedi just doing my work and nobody knows who the hell I am. So I appreciate it quite a bit, especially from an author who has the success that you do, which I think is fantastic.
Mild success comparatively.
Well, I mean, I haven't sold whatever it is, 100,000 books or whatever, but
65,000, just 65,000, just so we don't inflate.
we exaggerated.
I don't want to exaggerate. 65,000 as of this recording. So yeah,
this is awesome. No, this is a great thing. But like, I mean, it's kind of probably similar to the advice that you might give, but I'll say it like this because it's something that I found myself saying to lots and lots of people, not only when I just met them in projects that I was doing, or I'm acting, or I'm doing this or whatever, but I drove for Uber and Lyft for a while prior to the pandemic. I was just simply enjoying it actually at the time and making a little bit of money. And it gave me time to reflect on my writing and the work that I was doing. But anyway, I found myself saying this all too often to people. You only have so many years on this earth and this planet to do whatever it is that you want to do, whatever it is that you hope to do, and whatever it is that you feel you were meant to do, if that's even a possibility. So my advice would be, you best get going, right? You better work on it, because you might be someone who's in the Ukraine right now, not to date this video, or right? You might be someone who's in a country where bad things are going on, and you don't know if your next day is going to be, I got to abandon my dreams and I got to just do this hard job, and I'm not going to have time for nothing else.
Yeah.
So I was like, if you have the ability, if you have the coin, if you have the connections, if you have the computer skills, if you have the community, if you have the Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you are not a Jedi yet.
Yeah.
Right? You have to do the work. If you don't do it, no one's going to do it for you. And even if you can contract for the help, there's no saying that they can't quit,
Yeah.
and they can't balk, and they can't screw you over. So you have to be your own boss. You have to set deadlines, and you have to hit them. You
Yeah.
cannot push them because you happen to be the boss. You have to look at it like, if I was not me and I was the boss of me, would I fire me because I suck? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like, if the answer is no way, like I'm too valuable, I'm like, then you're probably in a good position. But if you sit there and look at it, you're like, I'm lazy. I don't hit my deadlines. I don't write well enough. I hear about these people who write 1,000 words a day or 2,000, like Stephen King. These hacks.
Yeah, hacks.
Right? Stephen King's freaking ridiculously awesome. So, but the point being is, if you're saying, well, I don't care about word count, I'm like, well, your book will.
Yep.
You will not have a book if you don't have a book. I know that sounds stupid, but like, think about it. If you don't type, there is no way. And also, we all know, right, David? Just typing out the words is not the end of the story. It may seem like it to you, but then now you have this rough, raw clay that you've kind of molded into something, but now you got to get out the tool and be like, scalpel. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Look, I keep a spreadsheet with the word count. I do between 1,500 and 3,000 words a day, but A, that motivates me, but B, I now have written enough books. I know by the word count about what should be going on, where the arc should be, and what things I got to set up. Yeah. So my advice is keep a word count and write as much as you can every day, and never write nothing, which is kind of what you said. You said it much more eloquently with the ticking clock of life is your motivator.
Well, not to go the wrong way on my book here. Wait, where am I pointing? There we go. Is the tagline to Diamond Dragons. And by the way, if anybody wants to visit the website and give me the support I really need,
I'll put a link to your website below this. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's diamond-dragons.com.
Yep.
But the tagline, which is hard to read on my background, but it's time is the only resource for which no creature may bargain. And there's a lot more to the way the taglines go and how they all factor into the work.
Yeah.
But I also feel like I hate to say it, but even if someone looks at my cover and they never touch it again, I'll be like, it's pretty good advice.
It's good advice. It's good advice. All right, Matthew, look, it's been a serious pleasure. I know you've got another book coming out on a solstice that's coming up. We now know your release calendar, which is brilliant. Let me know when it comes out. Maybe we'll chat about how that one went, and then see what's up.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to come back. In fact, that's the thing is I've had a few readers who have emailed, because I'm not on Amazon and I don't really have any plans to be. Maybe after this broadcast, you never know. But the things I appreciate the most are when people have emailed and they went, Matthew, this moved me so much. Like, you don't understand. They go on this big thing, David. And it was very touching, but because the book it's extremely, it's emotional. There's a lot of things in it that will just destroy you by design too. Yeah. However, there's, high triumphs, but my point is that by affecting these readers and having them email me and tell me the experience that they've had, this has been the most important part, David, because instead of it just being like, okay, well, that was fun I think they learned something, David. Like, I think they really reflect. And that's part of one of the biggest lessons in the book, reflection. And
Wow.
I hope we all do it.
Yeah. And the way you talk
Physically,
about
emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually.
Yeah. Brilliant. No, and the way you talk about putting the stories together, and it's certainly one of the best produced books I've ever seen.
Well, I really
Independent of how
appreciate
it's
it. I mean,
published.
it
Yeah,
means a
so
lot because, I don't know all these things because it's not like I am sitting next to J.K. Rowling or Rowling. I'm not even sure how to say it sometimes, or Stephen King or,
yeah.
or James Patterson or even yourself. My book is completely unknown, and I'm not trying to go like, oh, boo-hoo me. I'm like, that's how everything is. If you're not uh, connected to some magic publisher and or a horde of individuals, all of which are on your team, and they're trying to get your name out there. If you're alone, you're alone.
Yeah.
do the work, and just you have to find out what's going to happen there. If 2 people buy your book, that's fine. If 2 million people buy your book, that's fine. But you don't have any control over that unless you have the resources and the team to do it. If you're an individual, you just got to throw the dice and say, let's see what happens. But if you don't do it, you have no chance, obviously. Like if you don't finish your book, if you don't publish your book, you have no chance.
Yeah, you got to finish, right? By the way, the residuals are better on 2 million than 2. If you wanted any, financial advice, yeah. But all right, sir. Well, Matthew, thank you very much. We'll talk again later.
Thank you, David. It's my pleasure, and I really appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. Please consider hitting the subscribe button.